Hello and welcome to my slingshot video. This video we're going to build a slingshot with a sand casting and poured aluminum, and basically take a store-bought slingshot and turn it into an aluminum replica. There are excellent videos on the internet that show you how to take a wood pattern such as this one that I cut out and make it in two halves and go through the whole process. I've done that. My first slingshot I made came out of the mold looking something like this, which when you look at it, when it first came out it was kind of depressing because I could tell that there was going to be a lot of rasping, a lot of sanding, a lot of grinding. But the finished product turned out pretty good. It's not perfect, but for a first attempt, it's not too bad. There's excellent videos already on YouTube that show you how to go through that process. What I'm going to show you with this video is how to take a store-bought slingshot, or one you've made out of wood that you really like, and how to turn that into something permanent, something that you can, heirloom quality, you can hand down, to your kids or your grandkids. This is a Scout slingshot from Flippin' Out Slingshots. I'm not doing this video to show you how to reverse engineer their slingshots and mass produce them and put those guys out of business. That's not the intent at all. I sent them an email and asked them for permission to do this, and never received word. So I'm taking that as a permission to make one, at least, to show you how to do this. The reason I chose this slingshot is I bought this slingshot, and this is an excellent slingshot. It's one of the most accurate slingshots that I've ever shot. And not that I've shot very many, but this one was the one I researched, and this is the one I really liked. I built one out of wood similar to this, but I don't think it would survive the molding process. This is a nice durable plastic, something that you can press down in the sand and not scratch it up or not run the risk of breaking it. This is an excellent slingshot. If you're not going to build one out of aluminum, I would recommend this slingshot. It just fits me naturally, and shoot it well. So the video I'm going to show you is the process that I went through to take this slingshot that I bought off the internet, called Flippin' Out Slingshots, and turned it into an aluminum replica. Something that has a little more mass, it's a little more beefy, and I was able to sand some of the sharp edges that come with this slingshot. I was able to smooth those out and round them out a little more on the aluminum. So before I get into the process of how I made it, I kind of wanted to show some other things that I found with this slingshot. I went and bought a cell phone holder, just a cheap cell phone holder from Walmart that has a nice belt clip here on the back, but it makes an excellent slingshot holder. The bands fit on it really nice. Has this flap that goes down between the forks and holds it in place real well. This sits on your belt real easy, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to clip it on. And it's nice and compact and great for taking to the woods. You don't have to worry about your slingshot falling out of your pocket. So this is definitely worth the investment if you're going to buy a slingshot of this design. The aluminum slingshot that I built, actually went to Gander Mountain and bought a small pistol case that's padded on the inside and works really well for transporting the aluminum slingshot. It doesn't get all dinged up from bouncing around the back of the truck or wherever you're going to store it or how you're going to transport it. Keeps it nice and compact, and you can lock it, so there shouldn't be any issues with if you would pulled over, you'd be in trouble or anything like that. So I'm going to cut to the footage I took from when I built the slingshot, and hope you enjoy. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to leave them down below. Here's a picture of the two slingshots side by side. The one on the right is obviously the one I bought off the website. The one on the left is the aluminum duplicate that I made. It's poured aluminum. Um, it's made to be utility in nature. It's not a work of art like a lot of the slingshots that you see on Flippin' Out's page. Forge I built. This is basically just some concrete blocks I had laying around the garage, and then I made a trip to Lowe's, and I think these smaller blocks were about $1.25 a piece. One of the things that I started my first forge, I basically just had the blower in the bottom, just kind of like you see on a lot of YouTube videos, and that worked, but it took a long time to heat up the aluminum to the point where it was melting. So I went to the hardware store and spent about $10 on some parts. As you can see, I built a small manifold to focus the air a little more, where I wanted it to go, right in the middle of the coals instead of just blowing at it from the outside of the forge. Here's kind of how the forge is assembled. The blocks on the bottom are just risers to get it up off the ground a little more. I left the little crack, the separation there for the manifold to sit down in. This forge has melted a lot of aluminum, and as you can see, it's held up pretty well. Some of the blocks are starting to spall concrete a little bit, but it's not too bad. And if they fail, then it's another $1.25 down at Lowe's. That's how the manifold, I designed it to sit in the forge. As you can see, it sits in there pretty nicely. The crucible sits right between the two prongs, and the air blows right on the charcoal. And when I pile the charcoal in there, I usually try to pile it up about halfway on the crucible, and it does a real good job of melting the aluminum. Essentially, this is a blower to air up a camping mattress, one of the inflatable mattresses. I think we picked this up at a yard sale for a couple dollars. One thing that this design that I came up with, I've since modified it a little bit. When you turn the forge off, when you turn the blower off to pull the aluminum out of the forge and so forth, the heat tends to go back the pipe and go back up into the motor. And this particular blower, I ended up melting it pretty good inside. The new blower I've got is about half that size. It puts out a lot less air, but it seems to work just fine because it still heats the aluminum up fairly quickly. And I made it so that it detaches. So when I turn the blower off, I actually pull it off the pipe so that the heat can't go back up in it and fry the windings. But yeah, that's a method that seems to work really well with that manifold. Here you can see I've got the forge fired up. We just started the fire in the forge. I gathered up a few twigs around the yard that were kind of dead and brown, and threw them in there with some newspaper and kind of got a small fire started. Here we're loading up the forge with charcoal. I like to fill it up pretty generously, about halfway up the crucible. That seems to get it nice and hot very quickly. As you can see, there's just aluminum laying on top of the blocks there. That's part of a storm window that we chopped up. Those were just scrap. We tried using tin cans. Tin cans did not work very well at all. They left a lot of slag in the bottom of the crucible. But the storm windows seem to work pretty good. Here's the mold. This is essentially just 1x4s screwed together. You can see the angle braces there. One of the things I did do on this mold that I haven't seen anyone else doing on their molds on YouTube is I put the little latches on each end. Some of the molds, I noticed they were piling concrete blocks on them to hold them together after they were compressed. That seemed kind of unwieldy, and also when you put the blocks on the mold, if your sand isn't high quality, like my sand is kind of homemade, it's not real high quality store-bought green sand, but the sand tends to fall apart in the mold with the vibration. So this method, you just clamp the two pieces together, and there's really no way it can expand and open up. If you notice here, I've just filled the bottom half of the mold with sand. There's no pattern in there or anything. And at this point, I'm going to take the store-bought slingshot and just press it into the sand. This is just compressing it in. The sand is in there pretty tight as it is, and you can tell it takes quite a bit of force to push this slingshot into the sand. But once I get it in about halfway, you kind of touch up the edges, touch up the sides, and you'll see that it does a really good job of forming in the mold. One of the things I did with this part, and you want to do with any slingshot, is make sure you press the lowest part down in the mold. This slingshot has a pretty good palm swell, and it's not even. One side definitely stands out more than the other. And the reason you want to put the deepest part down is so the gravity will pull the liquid aluminum down easier. We tried it the other direction a couple times with a different pattern, and what we found was the aluminum was cooling quick enough that it created some voids. But when we turned the pattern over and put the deep part down first, it seemed to take care of a lot of those issues. So that's just a information thing. Here I'm just using baby powder. I noticed on the internet a lot of guys use talcum powder. I'm probably a little more generous with my baby powder than they were on theirs, but if I don't put so much down, I notice that a lot of my sand will try to stick from the top half to the bottom half. So this is talcum powder. Baby powder's cheap. So here I'm just going to pile more sand on top of the store-bought slingshot and compress it down and just kind of mold it around with your fingers there at the first. Make sure it gets good and compacted around the edges and around the sides. My sand was basically play sand that I bought at Lowe's, and mixed it with some kitty litter. I used the recipe that I found on the internet, and I don't remember the exact ratio, but I do remember that the ratio was about half of what I needed. I took the kitty litter and ground it up in a blender and mixed it really well and added some water. And the first batch worked okay. It wasn't great. I added more kitty litter, and it seemed to do a much better job. Okay, you can probably see over there the top of the frame one of the previous slingshots we did. It's kind of that was one of our wrecks that didn't turn out so well, especially in the palm swell area. We got the chop saw out, and we're going to cut it up and probably remelt it. Here I've got the mold taken apart, and I like to put the part in the top part and kind of touch up the edges and shape it a little better. You'll notice that I'd forgotten to insert the caulking tube to give me a location to put the aluminum in. So I was going to press a hole there and make that work. Unfortunately, the battery died right then, so you didn't get to see the rest of that. Here we've shut the blower off, and we're going to open the forge up a little bit and take the crucible out. That's just a 4x4 tube that we welded a bottom in, and that seemed to work pretty well. It's a blatant copy of another YouTube guy that made one of those, and I watched his video, and it looked like a good idea and a good way to pour, so we kind of copied his method there. Here we're pouring the melted aluminum in the mold. This is a first run that we did, and we almost didn't have enough aluminum melted. We didn't know kind of how much it would take to make this part, and this particular pour we barely had enough, but it did turn out okay. Here I'm just putting the crucible back in the mold to continue melting aluminum. We made 4 slingshots this day, and one turned out really well. A couple turned out okay, and then this first one here, it didn't really turn out too well. Um, Here we're just getting ready to break the mold open and start knocking the sand off. It's been sitting for probably about 10 minutes, and you can see it's still pretty hot in there. Those little tins you see over to the left, my dad brought some little scallop-shaped muffin tins that he got at I think Goodwill. We were going to pour some of the extra aluminum in. They did not work out very well at all. The scallops grabbed the aluminum too well, and they just wouldn't come out. The muffin tins we got over to the right seemed to work much better. The aluminum just popped right out. Here you can see we've almost got the slingshot out of the mold. We've about got most of the sand off of it, and if you look carefully, you can see that the ridges in the rubber handle actually came through on the top of this one. I was pretty surprised at how much detail came out for this type of molding, especially as coarse as some of our sand is. We did poke some holes in the top of the mold, and you can see kind of the air hole dents there. That's the back side of it. For some reason, it tends to get really dirty looking on the bottom of the pores. Here's the second one we did. Probably about 10 minutes after we did that first one. This one also has been sitting for probably about 10-15 minutes, and as you can see, it's still steaming pretty good in there. This one was actually the one we used. The other three we cut up, and they'll be remelted for their aluminum. You can see the runners sticking up where we poke the holes in the mold to give it some air. I think this one turned out a lot better than the first one, and the next two that we did, they were acceptable. They could have been turned into slingshots, but this one was by far the better. You probably noticed there, even the flipping out slingshots logo came through on this one. So this is after a lot of rasping, a lot of sanding, the finished product, and I decided to dip the handle into some tool rubber. You can get I got this at Arbor Freight. It's essentially just a can of rubber that dries in the air that you can dip your pliers in and so forth, the handles, and give them kind of a rubber grip. I thought that'd be a nice touch instead of making it all aluminum, give it more of a feel of the original slingshot there. I think I dipped a total of 3 coats on this, and it really turned out well. The rubber is pretty durable. It handles being beat up and dragged through the woods pretty well. It doesn't scuff up as bad as I thought it would. My biggest problem was dipping it and getting it all even. It seemed to want to go in at an angle, and no matter how hard I tried to put it in nice and level, it seemed like it didn't want to cooperate too well. But it did make a nice touch to the slingshot. Don't know that it gave you much more grip, but it feels a lot better. It feels a lot more natural. Feels a lot more like the store-bought one that we had, that we copied to make this. As you can see from what I mentioned earlier, it's definitely not level. It's not even. It did not turn out. It was not as easy to dip that straight as I thought it would be. You would think you could put it in a can of liquid rubber and it'd be nice and have a nice level seam there, but I didn't have the knack. I drilled the top of the slingshot out because we are going to put the flip clips on this slingshot. I really like the way those attach the flat bands. A couple of my other slingshots I've tied the bands on with the little rubber pieces of rubber, the rubber bands, and it does work. But I really like how clean and nice the flip clips look. It looks more like I think it should for something that you would buy at a store or something that's manufactured. tying the rubber on, it's functional and it works, but in my opinion, that wasn't the look we were going for here. And that's pretty much the final product right there. Here it is, ready to shoot. We got the bands on, and it was a very accurate slingshot. So that was the process we went through to make the slingshot. I didn't put any footage of us rasping it down and sanding it and taking the emery cloth to it. That's pretty boring footage. No one wants to see that process. It took about 6, maybe 7 hours to clean it up from what it looked like when it came out of the mold to what you saw at the end. This was a fun project. It was a project that I did with my dad. My dad is the one person who's always been there for me, and he's been my best friend ever since probably high school, which is quite a few years ago. He's my hero without a doubt. He's the one man that, if I could be like anyone, it would be my dad. So I got to spend some time with him when we did this project. He helped me to build the forge, and he's the one that welded up the crucibles to put the aluminum in. And actually, he's the one who supplied most of the aluminum. We did try some tin cans. I had a very healthy supply of tin cans, and as it turned out, they just weren't worth the effort. So a lot of the scrap aluminum is aluminum he came up with for the project. So thanks, Dad. It was a lot of fun to build this project with you. The slingshot itself, when it was complete, my stepson's birthday was just a few days away, so I decided to give it to him for his birthday. And this will hopefully give us an opportunity to get together more often than we have been, and spend some time kind of plinking cans and target shooting, and who knows, maybe go down to the river bottoms and shoot at some bottles or something. So the process of building the slingshot was rewarding, and I'm sure the process of playing with the slingshot, now that it's built, will be equally rewarding.